Okay, good evening, everybody. Good evening. Come on in. Find your seats. Come on in. We've got the Nashes here. Mindy's here. The Herds are here. Phil Giltman made it in from Tennessee. All right. Sandy, hello. Jeffrey, come on and have a seat. Judy, have a seat. Okay, everybody, page 375 in your Moxor. It's so good to be here. So welcome everyone, and this is really special on so many levels. First of all, and I'll have to check my stats, but we have not had a scholar in residence here since I got here. 3 years we had Rabbi Daneman here locally. We haven't brought somebody in since before I got here, so call it 10 years? I am going to open a debate. It's been a while. All right. Another piece, of course, is that we have not had this type of Torah teaching on a weeknight in person since before COVID. All right, and in part just we got into the habit of the evening classes are going to be online and daytime classes will be in person, but it does feel good to have folks coming back to the synagogue during the week, and with a little planning and dealing with Atlanta traffic, you can do it. It's not that big a deal. So wonderful. I want to thank Nora Florsheim and the Bakers Brigade. I've named you that. Okay. Who really went all out, and Nora and her crew always classed the place up, and we really appreciate that. So everybody should hang out afterwards. A word of thanks to Norman and Diane Cohen. Will you just stand up and, hi guys. Norman and Diane are underwriting and supporting the Scholar in Residence program. For those of you who read Kesher Quick this week, you saw that Lee and Arlene Katz had been doing this for a long time, and at some point recently, Norman and Diane have picked up the torch, and in doing so, you allow Torah to come to this place. You elevate us as a community, each individual Jew, and thank you so much for doing that. It's a really big deal. We really appreciate it. Lifelong learning at Temple Emanu-El, and some temples they call it Talmud Torah or Adult Ed. Lifelong learning is really important here. And there's something like 12 mini mesters that are offered each year over the course of the year, plus a number of pop-up standalone classes. And each year, one of our goals as a staff and a clergy team is how do we get more and more people learning? How do we get people to come and study Torah? And that's a wide interpretation of Torah, right? Sometimes it's the 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy. Sometimes it's general Jewish text, but we also include in that Jewish history and Midrash and culture and Broadway musicals. Okay, so wide interpretation of Torah, but Jews coming together to learn at the synagogue, under the auspices of the synagogue. Nothing but good things can happen to that. We call that Torah Lishma, study for the sake of higher thought, higher thinking, and it's partly what makes us as a civilization tick. I want to welcome Rabbi Eli Hersher and Bonnie Hersher, who are lifelong friends of mine now, mine and Marita's. When Marita and I came to Los Angeles, Eli gave me my first job as a rabbi. This is my second job and my final one. Thank you. Yes. And I'm gonna read Eli's bio. It won't take but a moment, and I want to add a couple things to it. But both of them are so special to us, and not just as individuals, Daenu, but the learning that comes from Rabbi Herscher through Stephen S. Wise Temple into the myriad of rabbis that he has put into the world, including yours truly, has residual effects like that pebble in the still pond with expanding concentric circles. Rabbi Eli Herscher, the son of refugees who fled Nazi Germany. Eli Herscher was born in Tel Aviv just months before Israel became a state. He was still an infant when the War of Independence broke out. The history of the Jewish people during those years of death and rebirth is deeply ingrained in Eli's personal story, as well as the core inspiration for his work on behalf of the Jewish people. The professional and personal have always acted as mirrors for Eli, reflecting his lifetime of work to turn memory, even painful memory, into blessing. The promise of America embraced the Herscher family as new immigrants in 1954. It was a vibrantly diverse San Jose, California that welcomed them, so that the family's immigrant otherness was never a barrier. The memory of that reception has also been an important source of inspiration and resolve in Eli's life work to welcome and embrace the stranger. Upon graduating high school, Eli attended the University of California at Berkeley, where he earned his undergraduate degree in English. In 1970, he entered the Hebrew Union College to begin his rabbinic education. He was ordained a rabbi in 1975, upon which founding Rabbi Isaiah Zeldin invited him to become his partner in the growing of Stephen S. Wise Temple, leading to an inspiring career spanning 40 years in this one congregation. 40 years in one congregation. They were years of extraordinary growth, not only in numbers, but in the temple's richness of spiritual and educational program. Throughout the decades, Eli blessed the congregation with his depth of vision, his inspired teaching, his love of Israel and the Jewish people, as well as his innate ability and mission to welcome all who entered its doors and make them feel fully at home, Jewish or not, homeborn or immigrant, an open tent with an open heart. At its height, Stephen S. Wise Temple in Los Angeles had about 3,500 families. To give you comparison, Temple Emanu-El has just north of 750 families. So 3,500 families, and it remains one of the largest congregations in America. Eli met his life partner, Bonnie, at the temple. They've been married over 40 years and are blessed with 3 children, all of whom are graduates of the temple schools, Dawn, Adam, and Sarah, as well as, so far, 3 precious grandsons. Eli was named senior rabbi for Stephen S. Wise in 1995, and then emeritus in 2015. Eli and I left the same year. He retired, I came here. In his active retirement, Stephen S. Wise Temple remains his Jewish home. He treasures the countless memories and abundant blessings of the generations, just as he continues to nurture, with deep gratitude, the precious friendships born out of years of devoted leadership. So I'd like to transition to Rabbi Eli Herscher with a prayer. Shema Kolenu, Adonai Eloheinu. Please, God, hear our prayer. God of learning and aspiration, community and scholarship. God of people coming together for the best and for the worst, to celebrate and to support, to strive, to aspire. Please, God, be with us in this moment, these moments here at Temple Emanu-El, in our beautiful sanctuary. Be with us as we embark on this Scholar in Residence weekend of learning, of growing, and connecting together. And we say, Amen. Without further ado, Rabbi Eli Herscher.
I could stand here for a while just in silence, but it's not what you came for. But it would be, in certain ways, more powerful for me just to appreciate quietly Spike's words, his introduction. I don't think I've had someone read those words out loud, so I've only seen them on the page, and it sounded good to me. It sounded good hearing them in your voice, because yours is a voice. You know him as Rabbi Spike? Rabbi Spike, Rabbi Spike. Okay. And Marita has entered the room. Yay. We all have stories clearly in our lives that inform who we are. Some of those stories are, this is the talk before the talk. Rabbis often have a talk before they start talking. Stories that end up really making us who we are, defining us. They're stories that have to do with where we grew up, who our parents were, who our grandparents were, the people who influenced our lives, our experiences as children, our experiences as adults, who our teachers were. So the 7 years that I got to spend with Spike and Marita and, all of their, where's Maccabee? There he is, okay. So Maccabee, who's almost 17, was 2 years old when Bonnie and I met him. And I could comment about how he's grown physically, but that anybody knows, anybody can see. But we just spent time at dinner. And Moses isn't here tonight. Lulu isn't here tonight. But whatever you do here at Temple Emanu-El, you've already brought 3 folks into the world who will add up to more and already do than all of the blessings of a career, as far as I'm concerned. It's our most important work to give children, to teach them. And we just had a conversation over dinner. And Mac, I just want to move to Atlanta because you're here. And I wish I could be part of the dinners in your home that I hear about, in which learning takes place through the expression of lots of opinions, passionate conversations that, oh gosh, okay. So Bonnie and I got here 23 hours ago. We landed, and it's been a wonderful day. And the best part has, forget them for a minute, the best part is just, this is a compliment to you as well, obviously, has been sitting with you and listening to you. And I can't wait to hear what Moses has to say and what Lulu has to say if she's given a chance. So I'm going to talk about stories tonight, because it is our stories, as I said a moment ago, that define us, that give us a sense of who we are. And also, there are stories, and this is certainly the case when we're talking about our Jewish tradition, stories that allow us to imagine who it is that we might yet become. Talking about stories, spring has sprung. I hear very recently in Atlanta, it was a gorgeous day, and when spring comes, Pesach comes, and next Wednesday evening, as you know, we will sit around our Seder table and we'll tell stories. The word Haggadah, the text that we use, comes from the Hebrew root lahagid, to tell. Haggadah simply means storytelling. And we are a storytelling people. But before we begin to tell the story of our enslavement and our liberation, something quintessentially Jewish is going to happen next Wednesday evening at the table. In order for anything else to happen. Anyone want to venture a guess at what I'm talking about? What happens before you tell the story? Okay. You could say a number of things that would be right, but for me, what has to happen, and for the rabbis who created the Haggadah, what has to happen is someone's got to ask questions. So we have 4 questions being asked, because all of Judaism, all of Jewish tradition is attempting to be a response to questions that are essential real-life questions. And then after the 4 questions, Manishtana halayla hazeh, after those questions have been asked, then you go on and you have 4 very different kinds of children, and each of them asks a different question. And those questions are asked according to that child's interests, his or her interests, or their character, or just their capacity to understand. The child that I like the best, I like them, they're all really important. And for educators, it's an important lesson from the very moment that text was written, that we have different kinds of students. Each of us is a different kind of students, and each of us needs to be taught differently as well. The one I really like is what is called the tam. The tam is defined as the simple child. But although the simple child's question is asked in a very simple manner, I think it's the most profound question of all, and we're asking it tonight. That child asks, just 2 words in Hebrew, mazot. Simple question. What is this? He's asking, she's asking, what are we doing here at this table? We've already been told that this night is different from all other nights, but what is it that we want to accomplish tonight? And we could ask a similar question regarding Judaism, regarding all of Torah, regarding every text we encounter. We could say, what is this? What is this really about? What does this mean? Please help me understand. It's not tradition for the sake of tradition to have a Seder. It's not tradition for the sake of a tradition to take the Torah out and read it and study it. There are important questions that are being addressed. Judaism loves questions. There wouldn't be a Seder if there weren't real questions, human questions that we all have, not only about our history, but questions about life itself, its meaning. What does it mean to be a human being? Now, I'll tell you, when Spike first invited me to come to Temple Emanu-El, I said to him, what should I talk about? He gave me 3 sessions, tonight, tomorrow night, Shabbat morning. And he said, I don't know if you were thinking seriously. I think you just, yeah, okay. Spike said to me, talk about a Jewish understanding of what it means to be human. Small subject. Right? So in the spirit, that's a lifetime of learning Torah. What does it mean to be human? So it's in the spirit of the upcoming holiday that I begin with what I find to be one of the most disturbing, one of the most challenging, a really unsettling question that is asked by Jewish tradition. Tonight, the coming days, I'll share some stories that I think are attempting to be a response to the question. Here's the thread. In the Talmud, in the tractate Eruvin, two rabbis that you've probably heard about, Hillel and Shammai, who have, it's not just the two rabbis, it's whole schools of rabbis, followers, disciples of the two of them, engage in a debate. I think that's what it's like your table, your dinner table. It's what they spent their lives doing, arguing about the important questions. They always disagreed, and the question that they asked themselves and each other was, would it have been preferable had human beings never been created? Let that penetrate for a minute. Or is it better that human beings were created? Their conclusion. Shammai says it would have been better had human beings not been created. Shammai usually takes the more cynical view. He's the harsher scholar. Hillel is always the more compassionate, the more accepting, the more inclusive. And Hillel argues, no, it's better that human beings were created. But here's the key. They decide to take a vote of all of the rabbis. And here's how the vote goes. It would have been better had human beings not been created. Now, that's shocking to me. I first learned that text when I was a rabbinic student. I've not forgotten it. It's an extraordinary, we think of our tradition as being a deeply optimistic, hopeful one, always. And here you get this vote that says, and then they include it in the text. There's such chutzpah in it. In really good, chutzpah is often a good thing, to be daring. Take some chutzpah, some guts. There's an addendum to the vote. I'll wait till later. For now, why'd they ask that kind of question in the first place, some 2,000 years ago? Well, maybe they were looking at themselves, questioning their own existence, looking at the world around them, how human beings sometimes, often behave in that world. They weighed. We don't get the details of their debate. We assume they must have weighed what was great about human beings, and there is so much that is great about us. And they weighed that up against what they recognized as significant weaknesses and flaws. We acknowledge weaknesses and flaws in ourselves and in the world in which we live. But I am in awe of how deeply honest they were in being willing to ask the question at all. If we take their debate to heart, we acknowledge that human beings, human history, the state of humanity on this endangered planet even now, human beings give us reason to seriously consider their appraisal. The purpose of the debate was not to sink us into despair. Far from it. It was to get us to consider, to challenge us to ask the same question. What meaning is there to being human? Given the givens, can we potentially be better? Can we change the vote? Can we be better than we are? They appreciated that part of what makes us human is the ability to ask these kinds of serious questions and then actually daring to ask them. and then to include it in a text, and to give it to me as a rabbinic student who wants to be hopeful about the world, and say, slow down, Eli. Take a closer look. I read a story in a version of the Haggadah a number of years ago that I love, about asking questions. Nobel physicist Isidore Rabi, in physics, was asked once why he became a scientist. And he said that when he was a kid and he came home from school, most mothers, he says it was mothers, most mothers would ask their children, what did you learn in school today? But he said his mother didn't ask, what did you learn in school today? She said, Isidore, Izzy, did you ask a good question today? And Rabi said that's why he became a scientist. The Torah opens with a foundational premise, with an incredibly hopeful vision. God creates the world, and God comes to God's own evaluation. Virtually every day, what do we get at the end of that day's creation? What is the appraisal? God saw that it was good. That's the theme. Human beings are created on the sixth day. The only creature in creation to be made in God's own image. That is the first time in any religious literature that kind of bold statement it's a revolutionary statement to say that we are created in God's image. And the final evaluative statement on day 6 is, Vayar Elohim et kol asher asa, and God saw everything that God had made, and behold, v'haya tov ma'od. It wasn't just good, it was very good. Goodness abounds as the foundation of creation. And as we get into more of the nitty-gritty of the story, what does God do next? God takes dust from the earth, clay, forms what is as yet an inanimate body. How does that body become human? Was that Spike? Okay, I thought you know the answer. Breathes life. God's own breath goes into the clay, into the dust. The Hebrew word for breath, what we're all doing right now, God willing, for a long time. The Hebrew word for breath is neshima. God breathes a neshima, a breath, into the lump of clay, into the nostrils, and turns the dust into a neshama, which is the Hebrew word for soul. Neshama in Yiddish. The neshima, the breath, becomes a soul being, a human being. The traditional morning prayers said every day reiterate that. When it says, Elohai neshama shenatata bi tohorahi, most of us in this room probably are not saying those words every day. We should consider them. Because again of the bold statement, God, the soul you have breathed into me came pure from thee, came pure from you. You implanted it. You nurtured it. I'm alive because I am breathing you. Adam, the first creature, comes from the word adama, soil, dust. Adam is not a personal, we have a son, Adam. That's not who we're talking about, okay? We're talking about Adam just meaning human being, and he's symbolic of every human being. Adam comes from the Adamah. Human beings come from the dust, but with an ultimate ingredient, and that is God's breath. On the one hand, we humans, you and I, are nothing more than dust. You know that's true. On the other hand, at one and the same time, and this is the miracle of us, in every moment of our lives, every time we breathe in and out, right now, at this very moment, the breath of God is present. I love, Spike, the fact that you started us with a prayer. There are a lot of rabbis who don't pray out loud, actually, or consider the prayer that's the right one for this moment. Before we began, everyone I talked to talked about you. Because they love you. They have good taste. I was here 8 years ago. This is the speech, in the middle of the speech. I was here 8 years ago, August, when Spike invited me and you welcomed me to his installation as the senior rabbi of Temple Emanu-El of Atlanta. And one of the things I said at that time was a hope for you. I didn't tell you to spare him hard work, because rabbis should not be spared hard work, and he likes it. But what I did say to you is, don't break his heart with indifference. So here you are on a Thursday night. You're not indifferent. You have a great rabbi. Every human being on the planet is breathing that same breath of God. That underlying view of Spike's question to me, talk about what it means to be human, that's the underlying Jewish view, and it has the deepest implications about how we fit into the complex world around us, and also implications for what's expected of us. If we're created in God's image, what are the moral and ethical implications of that? Most importantly, what does that mean about how we treat each other, how we relate to the rest of creation, indeed our responsibility to the entire planet? No small matter in those words, God made man in God's image. So was it preferable or not that human beings be created? So far in the story, the response is a clear and resounding yes. How did they vote no? Didn't they read this? Of course they read it. They lived it. But of course, if it were that simple, the story could end right there. We don't need the rest of the Torah if there's nothing more to be learned about what it means to be a human being from a Jewish perspective, a Jewish vision. If we were created in God's image, that's enough. Good enough. But it wasn't that simple. The reason we have the rest of the Torah is because being human is complicated. Very complicated. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You know it. You're living it. It's complex. In fact, we don't have to read beyond the opening of chapter 2 of Genesis. Chapter 1, great. It was good. It was very good. Chapter 2, we get into it's complicated. Now we've got Adam from the Adamah, a soul being out of the dust, and we have Eve, Chava, the same root as the word Chaim, life, because Chava is the mother of all life, says the text. The two of them, they're not a man and a woman. You know what? There was a time where people said to me, do you really believe in Adam and Eve? It's just the wrong question. It is, it's not a matter of believing in them, it's knowing them, because they're us. We know them. Created from the dust, and all humanity, and the mother of all life. They are all men and women, all of us. They've been given absolutely everything that they need in life. They have been given everything that's more than enough, quite honestly. But we human beings have a tendency to want more. Yes? We know this about ourselves. The major conflicts that we experience in our world are about wanting more. Often wanting someone that belongs to someone else. Right? Like more territory, more riches, more real estate. One of the most joyful parts of the Seder next Wednesday, we could get into a whole conversation of what do you like best. I love Dayenu. You used it in your words just a little bit ago. When we start singing, Dayenu, Dayenu, that it would have been enough, is what we're saying, right? A whole list of things. If we've been blessed with this, Dayenu. But we're blessed with more than that. This too, Dayenu. All of this, everything that we have could be enough. So we've got the long list, and most importantly, we're free. That's enough. That should be enough. So we have this great Jewish hymn of gratitude. Dayenu tries to teach us that we have received one blessing after another. Gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. And one of the great challenges of being human is not knowing what is enough. One of the things that comes with becoming older is, for me, more and more it feels like, how could they, Dayenu, it really is enough. We may want other things, but we don't need much more than what we've got already, especially if we're blessed with health and family. So very soon, after you've got all of this goodness of creation and being created in God's image, our attention turns to recognize something else. Adam and Eve, these human beings, have a son named Cain, and he takes the life of another human being. All of this goodness, and then you've got murder. Like, you have to ask, how is that possible when you've got enough? But Cain, the story's complicated. We can't study it tonight. But he's waiting for more recognition. He wants God to like him best. A lot of the stories in Genesis are about who does dad like best. It's more often who does dad like best than who does mom like best. But okay, it was clearly patriarchal. And he murders his own brother Abel. So, and that's the beginning of a lot of future murders after the very good of creation. And when God asks Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" Does God not know the answer to that? Of course God knows. But he asks a question. God asks a question. And Abel's response, is, "Hashomer achi anochi?" Am I my brother's keeper? No answer is given to it. God says, "Oh my God." That's what God has to say. "Oh my God. Am I responsible for my brother?" And that is the ultimate question about what it means to be human. But more, it's the ultimate challenge of our Torah. We got it right there at the beginning. It's all good, folks. It's all potentially good if we're our brother's keeper and our sister's keeper. That's the challenge. It goes to the core purpose of Hillel and Shammai's question, would it have been better had we not been created? And now I get their vote. When this happens, and all of the future murders of every day of our lives. Whew. So the question kind of dangles there, because it should. Lots of questions in the Torah, especially, I think, in the first book. I remember many years ago, one of my teachers presenting the students with a puzzle. The teacher asked us, who's the loneliest character in the Torah? I had never thought of that. And one of the students said, well, it must be Abraham. He's a revolutionary. He's fighting a battle alone, seemingly. He must be the loneliest. And another ventured, it's got to be Joseph. His brothers throw him into a pit, try to get rid of him. And the teacher then went on to say, no, it's God. God is actually the loneliest character in the Torah, because God is often left bereft. God has to be grieving for God's vision for the human being. Just despairing that, doesn't anyone share this vision? That is God's vision? And what becomes clear, and this is a shift in the Torah, God becomes aware that God needs a partner. It's really extraordinary. Is there a religious tradition where God needs anything? Generally, does God need my prayers? Actually, I don't think so. Does God need the sacrifices that were offered in the temple? I don't believe in a God who needs that. God needs a partner to help make the vision real in the world, because that's where the vision has to be lived. That's where we become aware, conscious of our breath. There's a midrash to that effect. It actually says that this is not in the Torah. This is legendary material where the rabbis are just imagining worlds where God actually created. We have a while. We're good. Bear with me. You'll get a chance to talk or ask. The midrash is that before God created this world, that God created 10 others. I didn't learn that growing up. Too complicated, but God was disappointed with the way each one turned out. So God destroyed each of those worlds one at a time, and then said, let's start over again. It's kind of, a kid builds a whole thing out of Legos and then destroys it. The big fun is God, in some ways, here is like a petulant child in that midrash, destroying each of these worlds because it didn't turn out the way God wanted. But then we know after the flood, God promises no more. Here's a rainbow. That's the sign that I promise not to destroy the world again. If anyone's going to destroy it, God is saying, it'll be you, my partners. I'm not going to destroy it. God declares a new model. God declares God is becoming all the time. God is not static. God is evolving like we are. God takes human beings at that moment as complete partners, essential partners. And that's you got a lot of radical moves here. Unheard of, I think, in other ancient religious traditions and mythologies, that God says, that God actually limits God's own power, says, I can't do this alone. I need you. The grandest book written with that title is Abraham Joshua Heschel's, who has history in Atlanta and in Georgia. He's not from here. I'm not going to talk about Heschel, but Heschel wrote a lot of extraordinary books, but the most of all is a book entitled God in Search of Man. He also wrote one about Man in Search of God, but God in Search of Man is kind of the Heschel Bible. Our Jewish religious tradition speaks of a God who sees human beings, us, as sufficiently holy and significant that as weak as we sometimes are and as mistaken as we sometimes are, nevertheless as being partners with God in the work of creation. There's a gorgeous midrash. This is about 1,500 years ago. The planet is very different now than it was 1,500 years ago. The planet is very different. They didn't know anything about global warming, climate change, why we're getting so much rain in California right now, which we need in smaller doses. So the Midrash says when God created Adam, God took Adam by the hand and took him on a tour of the entire planet. And Adam got to see how wondrous and extraordinary the planet was. The oceans and the forests and the birds and the animals, and just wondrous. Kind of like, when the picture of the blue planet was taken from outer space, and you see this grand and beautiful thing that we're living on, floating out there in the universe, and you're filled with wonder because of it. God said to Adam, guard this. Take really good care of it. 1,500 years ago. Because if you destroy it, there will be no one left to come after you to repair it. God needs partners to protect the planet and the animals and the humans on it. So often in Genesis we get in our own way. Each generation of the book of Genesis, I'm not going to give you the whole book tonight, promise. But most often it finds families that are fairly dysfunctional. They are. It's okay. There will be some dysfunction around the Seder table. At least there is around mine. And I won't go there. But we're human beings. In Genesis, we've got brothers, most often, who are not in partnership, but they're in conflict. Sometimes there's even deadly rivalry between them. The twins, Jacob and Esau, are already fighting with each other while they're still in the womb of their mother, Rebekah. We are told that in the Torah, we're told that they represent two nations who are going to wage war with each other for dominance. Who's going to be greater? Who's going to be stronger? Who's going to be richer? Who will have more land? Whose life will get the most blessings? The most pitiable sentence, I think, I could find a few others, but the one that strikes me the most painfully is spoken by Esau, Jacob's brother, when Jacob has received his father Isaac's blessing, that Esau bursts into tears. The quote is, Esau burst into wild and bitter sobbing and said to his father, "Bless me too, Father." Is there really a scarcity of blessings in life? That's what that Torah is suggesting. Like, are there really not enough blessings to go around? Not enough to be shared? In some of these stories, they're there for a purpose, to reflect us. Are we doomed to believe that there aren't enough blessings? Are we doomed to believe that there's a shortage of love? Any of you who've had more than one child, I don't know about any of you, I just speak for myself. When Adam was born, I said to Bonnie, when she was pregnant with the person who, the one who would become Sarah, our youngest, I said, is there any way that we can ever love another child as deeply as we love him? Right? The answer, like idiot, that's the kind of question you're asking. Then you think, how's that happening? That there's enough love. There's no shortage of it. So here, in some of the Genesis stories in these families, the people are afraid that there's a shortage of love and blessings. And then I'll give you one piece more about it. Jacob and Esau end up being estranged for about 20 years. They're at war. They don't talk to each other. They don't see each other. That means the cousins don't get, so much is lost. This happens in families? Yeah. Oh boy. Painful. About 20 years later, they reunite. And what the text says is that that they fell upon each other's necks. They hugged, they embraced. And it says that Esau kissed Jacob on the neck. That sounds pretty innocent, loving to me. But there's actually some disagreement in rabbinic commentary about what happened there. One rabbi actually says, this is part of the Jewish literary imagination, that Esau came to represent Rome. That was the nation that Esau became. And who is Rome? At that time, the greatest enemy of Israel and the Jewish people, who destroyed the temple and exiled us from the land for 2,000 years. It says that Esau didn't really kiss Jacob, but he bit him. It takes me back to Hillel and Shammai, to some, like, can they get it right? Is it a kiss or is it a bite? What's our destiny? And I'm glad they say it. I'm glad they ask it. Doesn't depress me. Doesn't make me despair. You'll know why in a second. The Hebrew word for kiss is neshika. The Hebrew word for bite is neshicha. Okay, so they get to play with that. One letter difference between a kiss and a bite. Another rabbi says that Esau was indeed overcome with compassion and he kissed his brother wholeheartedly. So we like him better. But we don't discount where the other rabbi was coming from. Two radically different visions opposing of whether human beings can ever truly overcome enmity in our lives and in our world. And folks, the jury's out. The jury's out. Can we human beings buy into and live a vision of being united as brothers and sisters and partners? At the moment, we're not sure yet, and we haven't been in all of history. And it is the root, again, of Hillel and Shammai's debate. Just a dangling question in our world. Don't vote. It's not about our vote. It's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's about what are we going to do about it. That is why we get a Torah here. 2 generations before Jacob and Esau, you've got the same thing with Abraham's sons, Isaac and Ishmael, who came to represent two opposing peoples that we came to know as Arabs and Jews. Brothers perpetually at war with another, each needing desperately to be their father's favorite, to be the dominant son, to possess the land and the future. So all of these stories, we are still living them. And that leads finally to the very last of the prophets, Malachi, asking, really forcefully reminding us of the vision of creation. It was good, God's image. Malachi calls out, do we not all have one Father? Did not one God create us? Why should we then each betray each other? And we keep asking that same question. And with the Joseph story, again, betrayal by brothers, Genesis juxtaposes a grand, hopeful vision to the challenges and obstacles, and they all have to be with, what does it mean to be human? Finally, at the end of Genesis, you have a hint. There's no pie in the sky in Judaism. It's just not that kind of tradition. What is it? Pie in the sky when you die? That's not Jewish. There's realities. Finally, at the end of Genesis, you've got the possibility of forgiveness and reconciliation. You've got that hope for the brothers, possibly partnership. And then you ask, where's this all heading? Where is this story leading? What's going to be the conclusion of it? There's more than Genesis tomorrow night. There's Exodus. The eternal question. Will we write this conclusion? Will it be our children who write it? Will it be our grandchildren who write it? Because Jewish tradition believes that it will be written. That is, this is leading to a conclusion where the vote would change. But nowhere does it say when that's going to happen. The challenges and possibilities keep recurring as themes of the text, because what the Torah does best when we choose to study it this way is it holds up a mirror right in front of us. And it says, as you're struggling with this, here, take a look at yourself. You're in the story. Who are you in the story? What do you want that story to be, you humans? Who are we versus who we might become? The first time I heard Elie Wiesel speak I was a 19-year-old at the Berkeley Hillel. And I knew that he was coming. The only book of his that I'd read at that time was Night. You know, you read a book like Night, and at the end of Night, Elie Wiesel is totally in despair at the end of that book. But not his future books. It's worth reading them in order. So he was coming to speak, and so I read the book. And Maccabee, I'll tell you about what he said later, because it has to do with our conversation about violence. Actually, I'll tell it now. This was a hard time. This was 1967 or 8. So the Six-Day War had taken place. Our country was in Vietnam. There was a draft. There was turmoil in Berkeley and everywhere else, but mostly in Berkeley. And I remember someone challenged Wiesel. I have a little cassette tape of this, if it hasn't deteriorated yet. Someone asked him, with everything that's going on in the world, don't you believe that violence is necessary to make a difference, to make a change? And the quote that I remember from that evening at Hillel was Elie Wiesel saying, he was silent for a while and he said, "I still believe in the power of the word." And he didn't define that, but the power of speaking, the power of talking, the power of dialogue, the power of the word of Torah. On one of the occasions that he taught at my congregation in Los Angeles, he said the following, which is, for me, the best summary I've ever heard about what Judaism is about. Go try to explain Judaism to people. He said, I think I'm quoting him directly, I haven't found it in writing. He said, the purpose of my being Jewish is not to make me more Jewish. Elie Wiesel was an observant Jew. He wanted us to be more Jewish, more deeply Jewish. I think more deeply engaged in the meaning of our tradition and living it. The purpose of my being Jewish is not to make me more Jewish. The purpose of my being Jewish is to make me more human. Jews become more human through their Jewish, through being serious about their Judaism. Torah, at its broadest sense, is the Jewish effort to understand. This is why Spike asked me the question, I think. What it means to be a human being. And its intention is to help us, holding up a mirror for us of all of the possibilities, the good, the bad, the ugly, to help make us more human. What exactly that means comes into focus, not tonight, but more clearly for me in the next book, in the Exodus, and in the festival of Passover. Next week, when we sit at our table, Seder table, this is why we're there. Matzo ball soup is also a good reason to be there, and other things that are part of the meal, good reasons to be there. It becomes more clearly, I'll talk about this, those of you who are coming tomorrow night, about what happens when Moses, who is at the beginning of the story just an ordinary guy, he is like you and me too. When he hears God's voice speaking to him out of a burning bush that wondrously isn't consumed by the flames that never burn out, kind of the passionate presence of God that refuses to be extinguished in our lives. What more does that story tell us about who we are? And on Saturday morning, I'll talk about where does the promised land, where does Israel fit into this whole story? Because in the whole Torah, that's the destination, right? That's what we're wandering for 40 years. What happens then and now? I'll give you a foreshadowing with a final story for the evening. I almost forgot. I said there was an addendum to the Hillel and Shammai judgment about human beings when they gave us a thumbs down. They added the word, however. Okay? There's always more. However, when you hear the word however, you know that there's about to be a really important qualifier. However, now that human beings have already been created, that reality, they should examine any past behavior they regret and seek to correct it. And they should also scrutinize any future behavior before they do it that they might live to regret. And to think very clearly before you do something and evaluate whether they should do it or not so that they will not go further astray. In other words, human beings are entirely capable of waking up. Human beings are capable of becoming conscious of their infinite power and capacity to change and grow, to repair our lives, to repair our relationship to the planet, to the world, to each other, created in the image of God. Redemption is most potently present in the Passover story. So here, the timing works out. Here's one of my favorite midrashim. I'll close with it. It's a reminder of who we can be. I love this story. I first heard it taught by Rabbi Harold Showise, the late, one of my teachers. The greatest rabbi, I think, of his generation. When the angels heard that God was going to create human beings in the image of God, they got jealous of the gift. And so they conspired to hide the image of God from the humans. But where should we hide it? They asked themselves. One of them said, let us hide the image of God way up high, out of reach, in the highest mountains where the human will never find it. And another of the angels said, let us hide the image of God in the depths of the deepest oceans where the human will never find it. But then the cleverest of the angels spoke up. I have a much better idea, he said. Let us hide the image of God right there, inside the human being. It's the last place the human will look for it. There's the ultimate human challenge. And that's also our ultimate hope, to continually search and find the image of God in ourselves and in every other human being. With those of you who can join us any further beyond tonight, I look forward to sharing the rest of the journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Rabbi Hersher, do we have time for comments and questions? I want to, I think we've got some mics up here that will work. So, what do you think? You've got a...
Speechless.
You got a rabbi here who's... Thoughts, comments, questions? I'm looking at my Chaver Torah folks for a lead on this.
Back
Okay. Take the mic, take the mic.
Okay. When we were studying, I'm Evie.
Hi, Evie, like an AA meeting. Hi, Evie.
Oh no, this is going downhill from here. When we were studying with the rabbi, one of the things we talked about was, it's very timely, is that God's within all of us and that God needed us to as much as we need him so that we could admire, and he needed to have the reflection of the adulation and the, just like we need validation, God needed validation too.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a lot of what you were saying too earlier, and the rabbi, we had studied that.
Yeah, we talked about God and people being in relationship,
Relationship,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. There's a beautiful moment. There are like beautiful moments all over in the text. Thank you for that. I think I'll affirm that. When God wants to, Moses asked God, let me see your face. In other words, When you know someone face to face, that's as close as you're going to get to knowing. And ultimately, we can't know God that way. We're not talking about an image. We're talking about an image of God which is not a physical image. It's an aspiration. It's something higher, greater than we can ever understand. And we can only talk about God in human terms, because that's the only language we've got, is human language, and it's limited to what we're doing here. So, God likes Moses. Moses is a pretty important partner, and God hides Moses in the cleft of a rock so that Moses won't be able to see God as God is drawing near. This is all figurative language. This is all metaphor for me. Okay, this is not to be taken literally. It's just good stories. Good stories. Ultimate stories. So, Moses can only see God really from the back when God has passed by. And God says, "You cannot see my face, but I will make all my goodness pass before you." Another way of saying that is, God is saying, you'll know when I've been there. When I've been there, you'll know I've been there, and we do. I think we do. When you could tell me when God has been there. Each of us could find a way. Back there, Spike.
One
Oh,
right
here. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Linda.
Hi, Linda.
Hi. So we have a lot of evil in the world,
Yeah.
and yet we're all humans, supposed to be in the image of God. I don't understand about the evil people.
Yeah.
Do they not have a conscience? Do they not have that image?
Could you hear it? I don't understand evil people.
Couldn't hear the
but
question? Okay, maybe
Did
sort of
you hear it?
rephrase the question a little bit.
There's a lot of evil in the world. We're all human. I don't understand evil people, is what you said. And so number one, I'd say I don't either. So, not but. The Jewish vision, part of the Jewish vision, is that one day evil will have been vanquished. But our inclination, our ability to choose, is there from the very start. That is what makes us different than any other living thing. Okay? My wife and I have 4 dogs. We adore our dogs, sometimes more than some humans. I'm sorry, but she taught me that. But they don't really have any evil in them. They're not, the concept doesn't, they're not making choices. Sometimes they just want to be in your lap and they want to lick your face, but we're not dogs. So they don't have the freedom to choose. You put down the food, their instincts are going to tell them it's time to eat, and they're going to eat. They're not going to say, is that food healthy for me even, right? They have no choices really to make. They just seem to be filled with love, unless they're trained otherwise. So when it comes to human beings, the tradition says that we have been created to choose. And at the end of Deuteronomy, God says, I've set before you good and evil, blessing and curse, life and death. Choose life, that you and your descendants may live. So people make different choices. Why they do, you can attribute it to lots of things. Would I believe that anyone was born evil? Jewish tradition doesn't believe it. There is no such thing as original sin. There is no such thing in Jewish tradition. The soul that you have given me, O God, I read it to you from the prayer book, came pure from you. That's what I've been given. I've got the breath of God in me, but God makes God's self smaller to make room for us. That comes from the Jewish mystical tradition. And once there's room for us, we are not God. We're human, and we make choices. I have more to say about it, but enough for now. Yeah.
All right, I think we have one, maybe two more, depending on.
Yeah, depending on how long the answers are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell us your name.
You said something that called together a few conversations I've been having lately about God needing a partner. The conversations I've been having are about morality and whether God is inherently moral. And this is perhaps a controversial opinion, I don't know, but I don't think that morality is inherent to God. I think that as God creates people, people must create God. And so as it is God's responsibility to keep us going straight forward or in a direction, so is it our responsibility to hold God responsible when God misbehaves,
Okay.
which God does.
Is that the question at the end?
There's almost a question.
I
And
heard
so
one, but
I wonder whether you think, because I think this, whether we are perhaps uniquely qualified to
put
call
God on trial?
out on morality,
If you're uniquely qualified to
to call God out on morality.
Oh, I love that question. Okay, I've taught a whole class on that question. Whether we are qualified or not, we are in covenant. We are in a relationship. And if you're in a relationship, you've got some claims on your partners. All right? So I'm not suggesting we're equal partners, okay? But God calls us into partnership in these texts. So we're not nothing. Well, here it is. God is going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because they have become completely corrupt and evil and violent. And then God says, shall I not, these are the words, shall I not tell Abraham, since I'm paraphrasing, since I've chosen Abraham to be a partner, I've given Abraham be a leader toward the moral, toward the good. In other words, God's going to consult with Abraham. And then this grand story about us, again, and in response to your question. I'm going to destroy, and what does Abraham say? God, I'm only dust, and I'm only dust. Am I qualified? But Abraham knows he's been asked the question by God. He's been called into the conversation, and so what does he say? God, what if Sodom contains 50 righteous people, good people? Will you destroy the city, the innocent along with the guilty? Far be it from you. That's what it says. Chalila lacha. God forbid, God, that you should do such a thing. And then the great Hebrew, Hashofet kol haaretz, lo ya'aseh mishpat, shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? Chutzpah, the tradition has a title for this. This phenomenon, it's called chutzpah klapei shamayim, being chutzpahdik toward heaven. In other words, I'm only dust, but I'm going to dare to say this to you. God doesn't strike him with lightning. No hint that that could happen. And so, God, he convinces him, right? God says, okay, if the 50 lack 5, if there are only 45, I won't destroy, for the sake of the 5. This is the first negotiation. Okay, this is where Jews learn this is an important negotiation. It's life and death negotiation. And I love to tell the story, right? It gets to 10. Each time Abraham negotiates further. And God says, I will not destroy if there are 10. And that's the quintessential, I think, response to what, yes. And in Holocaust literature, all right, I got to tell it. The most powerful moment for me, and it's been 50 years since I've read Wiesel's Night, but I remember this. Let me see if I can tell it. That Wiesel was incarcerated in more than one concentration camp. And in Auschwitz, I'm going to tell you two, and I think that's maybe it, but it's up to you, Spike, and you, because I got nowhere to go. In the camp, selections were made, right? People were, and there is a hanging, an execution by hanging, and there are 3 hanging, dead, and 1 is a child. Talk about evil, the world. And it's enough to, we can question God in this, all right? So, Wiesel, who was liberated, I think he was 15, something like that. And Wiesel, as this teenager, hears someone behind him whisper the question, where is God now? And Wiesel hears himself say, he's hanging there on those gallows. The image of God has been murdered. Later, Wiesel writes, and to our conversation. Don't leave. Later, Wiesel writes in a book called A Jew Today, that after the Holocaust, people like him, young, once they ate and got strong, could have taken their anger and their outrage and wreaked havoc in Europe, could have turned it into murder, revenge, anger. And he said it never happened. It never happened. That survivors went on to get married, have children, do the kinds of things you do if you want to live a life, create, teach, heal, build. It's really quite amazing how many Holocaust survivors became home builders. A number of them in LA. Just symbolically, what does that mean to experience this and then go build or heal? So the question becomes our response to evil, of how we respond to it. So yeah, we have a tradition of arguing with God, beautiful tradition. In Holocaust literature, you find one amazing, amazing piece attributed to, this is pre-Holocaust, because there were pogroms, to the Rabbi Berdichev, blanking, who wrote like a Kaddish. Kaddish praises God. Every line is Yitkadal v'Yitkadash, may God's name be magnified, sanctified in the world. But Levi Yitzchak inserted in between the lines, magnified and sanctified be God's name, and then, God, your people are suffering. Your people are being murdered. Where are you? Yitkadal v'Yitkadal. Another line of praise, and then a line of protest. Praise and protest. going together. So yeah, it's great Jewish tradition to argue with God. It's part of what it means to be a human being. God, in the Abraham story, God wants us to argue with God. He invites it. She invites it. God invites it. We get very easy to fall into the gendered language. Forgive me.
I think, look, I'd love to have, I know we have lots, it's 8:30. Some people have to go to work tomorrow. So I think what we'll do, with apologies for those who do have questions, and I think lots of us do, we'll conclude for the evening. Let's have some delicious desserts from Nora and the Baker Brigade, and we'll continue this tomorrow night at Shabbat Services. Sound
Tomorrow
okay?
night and Saturday morning.
Saturday morning. Thanks, everybody.